Okay, so thanks everyone for coming, and I'm going to mute everybody else's microphones in case you want to eat something, it's your lunchtime or whatever, you can do that. This is our application workshop, so we're going to go through the application itself. It looks like everybody's planning on MD application at least, and some people DO as well. So I'm going to talk about the DO as I'm talking about this. The two applications are fairly similar. If you have any questions as I'm going, feel free to type it in the chat box, and I will, as I go along, try and help answering those questions. I have to say that some of the information on here I'm not completely sure of, and you may wind up needing to call the application service if it's a question about something that's really specific to you. So let's get started with this. So this is the AMCAS AAMC application. The DO application is also available right now. The dental application won't be available until the beginning of June. The MD application, the first day that you can submit it is July 7th, or sorry, June 7th. The DO applications can be submitted now. I recommend waiting another week or so and really taking your time at going through the application. So this is my MD application. You can see on here, I've been given an AAMC ID. And that ID is something that um, we you want on all of the pieces of documentation that go to them. So it's going to be really important that this number is included with your recommendations, which that's something that I will make sure that our office does. It also should be connected with the transcripts, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So here are all the different sections of the application. You do need to complete one to move on to the next. So the first section, you're just giving your legal name, your preferred name, any alternate names, anything that might appear on transcripts if you have a married name or maiden name. Any ID numbers, you probably won't have any ID numbers to add, but if you do, your birth date will go on here. This is not my actual birth date, just in case you're wondering. So that section should be pretty easy to fill out. Where were you born? What's your name? That shouldn't take long. From there, though, we get into sections that take a little bit longer. So you're going to start with high school information. Where did you go to high school? When did you graduate? They're not going to need your high school transcript. They are going to need transcripts from all colleges that you attended. So if you transferred into Northeastern, if you did high school classes or college classes in high school, if you had a freshman year at a different place, if you took a community college class over the summer, if you were a part of the NUN program, if you did study abroad, all of those things you'll have to consider. So you're going to enter, I went to Kalamazoo College, so I entered the information from that. You're going to put Northeastern in there, and you're just going to put the general information in here for each school. It's going to ask you when you graduated, did you earn another degree, did you have a major, did you have a minor? Things get a little bit trickier so the Northeastern stuff should be pretty straightforward. Things get a little trickier when you're entering information about study abroad. So for example, I did study abroad at an American Institute in Madrid. So I checked that this was a study abroad program, and there's a tutorial here about study abroad. There's a question, does a dialogue count as a study abroad? Dialogues actually don't count as a study abroad because you are taking them from Northeastern. It's a Northeastern class taught by a Northeastern professor. It goes on your Northeastern transcript. It just happens that you're not in Boston, you're someplace else. So dialogues are not traditional study abroads, and you don't have to declare them separately. If you did NUN, however, you do have to list that separately. If you did a study abroad program that was someplace else, that needs to be listed separately. If you did a study abroad, you don't have to turn in transcripts for any of those study abroads, except if it was an American college abroad. So for folks who did NUN, the American College of Thessaloniki, if you did NUN in Greece, that transcript does need to come in. So here we are on the page listing the colleges, American College of Madrid. That's where I went. It was a study abroad program. For advisor release, um, we require you to release to Northeastern if you want a committee letter, or a letter packet, which you guys should be wanting. I've checked no here because this is made up and I'm not actually applying, and I don't want anything to accidentally be sent to any of my institutions. For study abroad, you can check yes, you can check no, it doesn't matter. For Northeastern, though, we do require that you check yes. Did you earn a degree? So it's going to ask you the same questions. Did you earn a degree? Whoops. No. Did you have a major? No. Did you have a minor? No. So this is just study abroad. And then here it tells you, does AMCAS require a transcript? You only need to send in a transcript if it was US, US territorial, or Canadian. So just double check and make sure if the school was an American school or not. Most of them are not. So no, if it doesn't need a transcript, you have to fill out an exception request. This is the exception request form. It's not a separate form. It's just this form right here. So this is all you need to fill out for study abroad classes. Once you've entered all of this information in here, so these are the 3 schools that I went to. I didn't actually go to Swinburne, but some of you guys will have gone there. Once you're done, this also asks if you have post-secondary coursework anyplace else. Okay, and then this is going to tell you if the transcripts are required. Just read this over. The AP classes you don't need a transcript for. You'll add them as a part of your Northeastern coursework. If you got a 4 or a 5 on the test, those credits show up on your Northeastern transcript. Other courses, your high school classes, if you got a college transcript, you'll need to have that sent in. So you'll need to list it on here and have a transcript get sent in. Okay. Okay, and then there's all of this information here on foreign coursework. So if you're confused about what you did, independent study abroad, that I believe that's NUN falls into that category. Here's a partial list of the American colleges overseas. So it gives you more information about it on here. From each registrar's office, you're going to need a transcript request, and you're going to want these transcript request forms included within your transcript request. So if AMCAS gets about 250,000 transcripts a year. ACOMAS, which is the service that processes the DO applications, get fewer transcripts, but they still get a lot of transcripts. So if there's another Cynthia Seltzer, I don't want my transcript mixed up with hers. So what you'll do is you'll print out transcript request form. So it's going to create this for me. By the way, just a side note, all of these boxes that pop up are kind of annoying. However, I don't recommend turning them off because what's even more annoying is if you turn them off and you're not able to get things to work out and you have no idea why, which I found out the hard way. So I recommend keeping them on even if it is somewhat annoying, because then you'll find out, oh, I forgot to, I forgot about my name. So this is the transcript request form. If you look at it closely, you can see it has, if you can see this, it has my ID number on it. My AMCAS ID number is on here. It's got my transcript ID. The DO applications have the exact same thing as do the dental applications, so you'll want this included. For this transcript request form, you download it, print it out, sign it, scan it, upload it to your computer, and then when you make your transcript request, you'll ask the registrar's office to include that with your transcript. So the transcript request form, the signed form, goes in the transcript. Now, for Northeastern, they can't send the transcripts electronically. They don't have the hardware that AMCAS and AACOMAS need. Some other schools may be able to send it electronically, but for your application from here, from Northeastern, it has to be sent as an official transcript by paper, snail mail. It has to go directly from the registrar's office to the application processing service, so from the registrars to AMCAS. If it at any time is in your hands, it becomes void because unfortunately there are people who will do sketchy things like alter their transcripts. So they have to have just an abundance of caution with that. Um, One other thing that, oh, so previous matriculation, have you been a medical student anyplace else? That's probably going to be no. And then institutional action. If you had any actions at Northeastern, if you were written up, if you had to go to Oscar, you need to type yes, check yes, and then put in a brief explanation for that. So I just made this up. If it's something small, you were caught with alcohol as a freshman, you had a noise violation. Um, if you had one violation, just write it up really brief like this. I was written up, boom, I didn't have any future problems. Um, if you have multiple problems, that's a bigger issue for them. So you need to put a little bit more of an explanation. I mean, I don't think they need an explanation for, I was making too much noise after a Red Sox game. But if you have several violations, then they're going to want to know, what did you learn from this? And then always there's a section summary, so you can look that over. The biographic information, some of this is the only stuff that you can actually change. So most of the other stuff, once you submit, you're not going to be able to change it. So how do they get in touch with you? So if this changes after you apply, if you move, you can update that. Your citizenship, are you a citizen of the US? Legal residence, now this is where you're going to put your legal residence for the state schools. And we had a lot of discussion about this at the other meeting. Uh, if you're not sure what state you can claim residency in, your best bet is to contact the school directly. So for a lot of you guys, you're living in Massachusetts right now. It's very difficult to get Massachusetts residency. You have to pay taxes for 7 years in order to be a Mass resident. So for a lot of you who moved here for college, that's not going to be a viable option. So you're not going to be able to apply to UMass as a resident. You may still be able to have residency where you grew up. So for a lot of states where you grew up, where you graduated high school, is the place that you can declare residency. So let's say you grew up in New Jersey and you want New Jersey residence. Um, if you're just in Massachusetts for college and your parents are claiming you as dependents and all that, that's not a problem. If you've been working for a couple of years and living here, just call the school and ask them what's your policy on residence, to make sure that you're claiming the legal residence, because you don't want to claim legal residence if you're not a legal resident. On the other hand, you don't want to lose the opportunity to be in state for your in-state school if you have that option. So does that make sense to everyone? Hopefully. Self-identification, they're looking to see, are you an underrepresented student? What's your ethnic, racial background? Languages. So this will ask you what languages you speak. I speak some Spanish. So as we continue forward, it's going to ask you how well you speak them. So this is asking me about English. I'm a native English speaker, and we always spoke it at home. The next one here is, what's your proficiency in Spanish? So my Spanish is pretty awful, but I can. Oh, question, is there harm not to fill out ethnicity if it's optional? There's not really harm in that. Um, they're going to assume that they're probably going to assume that you're white if you don't fill it out. There is an advantage in filling it out if you come from a ethnicity or race that's underrepresented in medicine. So if your background is a background that does not have this great representation, there's definitely a distinct advantage to checking that off. Um, so in terms of language, like I was saying, my Spanish is pretty awful. I speak basic Spanish, so I was in Peru last year and I could communicate enough to find out, where do you get the bus and, what's going on here and what has bitten my arms and etc. Um, but not enough to have a conversation. So I checked basic. You can see the different ratings. You don't want to overstate your language ability. If you say, I speak advanced or I speak good, um, you might run into the risk of, whoever's doing your interview maybe is from Spain and is like, oh, finally a chance to conduct an interview in Spanish. Um, so just make sure that if you're putting advanced or good or native, functionally native, that you're going to be comfortable interviewing in that language. If you have some limited ability in a language, just put basic for it. All right, childhood, where did you grow up? Now here it's asking about, did you come from an area that is underserved? They're trying to get a sense of what your background is. About 70% of medical school students come from the top 30% income tier. They're really trying to get people from a wide variety of financial and other backgrounds. So they're really looking to accept people who are from whatever background, whether it be somebody who's from an urban background or a very rural backgrounds. So if you feel like you came from an area that's underserved, it's good to declare that. Obviously, don't make that up if you didn't. They also want to know, how did you pay for your post-secondary education? They're trying to get a sense of, what kind of financial resources does your family have? You don't have to fill this out. It's a good idea if you can to fill it out. You're just giving them information about who you are. The disadvantage status, what I have found is that um, nobody wants to fill out the disadvantaged status and say that they're from a disadvantaged background. It's not something that people get excited about doing. But if you feel like you came from a disadvantaged background, it's a good idea to fill out this disadvantaged status. Again, it's giving them information about your background, and it's giving them a little bit of information about the opportunities that you had when you were growing up. So if you came from a background where you had no opportunity, there was no money to pay for things like extra classes or SAT tutoring or space camp or soccer classes. It's good for them to have that information because it makes it harder to get to a point where you're applying to medical school if you've come from a background that you don't have as much access to resources. Okay. So, um, parents, again, they want to know a little bit of information about your family. Um, so some people have more than one parent or more than two parents, I mean. I put in my parents' information here. Sorry. If you have more than one parent, if you have three parents who raised you, I just put in imaginary crazy Uncle Joe. Say you had your parents are divorced and you had a step parent, you can add step parents in here. And then siblings. Some schools want to know if you have siblings. Again, it's fine to not fill that information out, but it's a good idea to fill it out just to give them more information about who you are and put your life into some perspective for them. Felonies and misdemeanors, hopefully you don't have any. What type of school is trade school considered? So we have a question here. What type of school is trade school? Um, if you have a transcript for college credit, then you're going to list that. Some of the schools are not accredited schools like Stackler School or something like that. If you're not sure if you need to send a transcript from a particular school, I would recommend just calling AMCAS and letting them know what the school was and asking, do you need to have a transcript sent in from this particular school? So if you, for example, did a medical assistant class at a school that, it's related to sorry. So here we are in parental information. If your parents graduated from high school, they didn't go to a traditional college, they went to a trade school. I believe that still counts as high school only, as opposed to going on to college. But I would just call and ask them about that. I think that it doesn't count as a college degree. Felony and misdemeanors. Hopefully you guys don't have any. If you do have, sometimes somebody has a misdemeanor or something they did that was whatever. Just make sure to list it. I heard about this case from another advisor where somebody didn't list a misdemeanor that was something really small. They were caught shoplifting or, something that was obviously a judgment mistake, but um, something small that wouldn't have kept them from being a doctor. The student was accepted to medical school. The medical school did a query check. The query check didn't find that. They graduated medical school, took their board exam, and then the licensing board found that misdemeanor and they said, oh, you lied on your application. We're not licensing you. We have problems with we have ethical concerns about you. And so that person, even though they went to medical school, still did not get to practice as a physician because they hadn't declared a misdemeanor on their application. So bottom line, if there's anything that you're like, I'm not sure if I should declare this, put it on there. And you can talk to me about that if you have questions about it. Okay, coursework summary. Now this is the part that's going to probably take you a lot of time because what you need to do is put in every class that you've taken at every school that you've taken it. So for your Northeastern classes, so this is edit courses here, you're going to go in each class that you took. I recommend having a copy of your official transcripts in front of you when you do this because you want it to be exactly as it is on your official transcript. And the best way to do that is have your official transcript right in front of you. I know you do have an unofficial transcript. It's probably fine to do it that way. I realize, very neurotic. Um, so I say just ask the registrar's office for an official transcript delivered to you. You can make your own decision. So you're going to add the academic year, the academic term. At Northeastern, we have fall term, we have spring. So we have first semester, second semester, and we have summer semester. So if you took a class summer 1 or summer 2, it'd still be summer. For CPS students, obviously they're on a quarter system, summer, fall, winter, and spring. Um, Year in school. So if you took high school class or college classes in high school, you'll put high school. It gets a little tricky with co-op. So your freshman year is basically your first 2 semesters of college. AP credit also kind of gets counted with freshman year. You would then put your next 2 semesters as sophomore year. Now, if you go out on co-op, you're only going to be in class for 1.5 semesters. So you want to look a little bit by credits. So assume that in a normal year, you take about a normal semester is 16 to 18 credits. So a normal year is what, 32 to 36 credits. So at 36 credits, you would switch from freshman to sophomore, and then you would start calling yourself a junior when you get up to what is it, 64 credits. So if you did co-op, just kind of go by the number of credits a typical student would have. Obviously, you're not going to change mid-semester, so whatever you start with, let's say you have 25 credits at the beginning of the semester that you're listing because you did a summer term, then list all of that as sophomore, and then the next semester start in as your junior year. If you graduated from Northeastern in 3 years, if you transferred into Northeastern, so you're coming in with transfer credit, for example, from a community college, and you did a year's worth of credit, or you did a year's worth of classes at another school, that other school is your freshman year. So those classes count as your freshman year. If you did them in high school, that I don't know about, and you should probably call AMCAS and ask them what to do. But traditional transfer credit would come in as your freshman credit. And then if you did post-bac here, obviously that's post-bac undergraduate. You're going to put in the course number and the course name of each class that you took, and then you're going to classify each one of the courses. And it does say on here somewhere how you decide on the classification. Obviously, anything that's biology, chemistry, math, or physics will count into your BCMP GPA. The other classes don't. So, and then if you took lab classes, so for example, bio lab, because it's a separate lecture and lab grade, even though Northeastern combines everything, you're going to put them down as separate. So for general biology, you have general biology as lecture only, and general biology lab as lab only. Oh, whoops. So one other thing that's unique to Northeastern is that you have co-op. If you did co-op and it shows up on your transcript, you want to also include co-op on your application. So you just put it on here as other course classification. Your grade is satisfactory. There are no credits associated with it. I would just click lecture only, although it's not really a traditional lecture. That does make it a little confusing, and then you can just click pass fail on that. Now, if you have current classes, so if you're planning to, if you haven't graduated yet and you know you're taking classes for the future, you can also add current or future classes on here as well. So that's an option. So you'll add all of your classes in here. Now, all of this gets sent when AMCAS or ACOMOS or ADSAS, the application processing services, get your application. What they're going to do is they're going to take the official transcript that you sent to them, all of the official transcripts, and they're going to take your application. They're going to look at them and they're going to say, is this correct? Have they entered everything correctly? That's the verification process, and that is what takes a while with processing your applications because an actual person has to look at everything and make sure it's correct. So if you put something in and you made a mistake, if it's just a small mistake, they're just going to correct it and update it, and they're going to let you know we changed this. So when most people, when they get their application back, when it's been verified, they'll see, okay, there are a couple little changes that were made. A lot of them are really small changes that are minor. Your application, your in, they change something from humanities to communication, whatever. A lot of them don't make any difference. You do want to look over your application once it's been verified to see what changes have been made and see is there any change that was made that you disagree with? Because you can contest that and say, wait a second, this is not correct. The people verifying the applications are just people. It's very rare that they make errors, but it does happen sometimes. And with that, they're not trying to make your life difficult with this, with entering all the coursework. Do your best to put everything in here. Enter it in a way that's consistent and that makes sense for you, and you're not going to have problems with it. They may make some changes, but they're probably going to verify it. The times that you run into trouble are when you're trying to get something by them, when you're doing something like your I don't know, listening to your intro to psychology classes, biology, then they're going to be like, okay, get this right. So just do your best on it. Um, there are these tutorials that are really useful. And yeah, so don't don't like stress too much about it. Just try and get everything in a way that you think makes the most sense. The work and activities sections for the MD applications, you have the opportunity to enter up to 15 different activities and experiences. The DO application is slightly different, and then they'll give you categories, and they don't necessarily have a limit. Although I believe they have a limit within the different categories. They're a little bit more flexible with them though. So for most of you, you're going to have a good number of activities and experiences. Maybe you'll only have 10. So I'm just going to take you to this one that I put in here. Now, this is something that a student who applied last year, this is from her application. She gave me permission to share it with you. So she worked as a volunteer for the Samaritan's Hotline. So the first thing is you're going to look at type of experience and you're going to put it in a category. Now, this was obviously community service, not medical or clinical. Some of the things are a little bit more difficult to figure out, like how do I classify it? For example, if you had a job that you were doing research, do you classify it as paid employment, not medical, clinical, or do you classify it as research? And I would say you want to think about what's most important to the schools. So they're really interested in your research. They want to know what research you've done. They don't necessarily care if it's paid or unpaid, so they want to see research as opposed to paid employment. So I would say if you've done research, you want to classify it that way. For your clinical experiences, you have paid employment, you have physician shadowing and clinical observation, and you have community service volunteer. So you want to distinguish between those different things. So you kind of want to think about, what categories does this fall into? If it falls into a couple different categories, what's the most specific, or what's the one that they're most interested in? Teaching, tutoring, you may have done some tutoring as a volunteer, you may have done it for pay, but what they really care about teaching and tutoring, so you probably want to list it as teaching, tutoring. If you taught or tutored on a volunteer basis, put that in the description, because that's something that they do care about, that you're serving your community. So you can put it in here, like if you did Pure Health Exchange, for example, you can put it as teaching, tutoring, and then just mention it was a volunteer position. You'll add the dates in here. You're going to give it a name, just like what you would give it on a resume. Total number of hours. You may not know the exact number of hours. Put a guesstimate that's something that's pretty close. Was it 10? Was it 100? Was it 1,000? They're looking at, you know, orders of magnitude as opposed to the specific number. Don't overestimate, don't make up a number that's not true. But if you're not 100% sure exactly how many hours it was, try your best to figure it out and put that in. Should we include shadowing? Yes, absolutely. In this section, you should include shadowing, physician shadowing, and clinical observation. That's something that's really important to some of the medical schools. They want to know that you've done that. They want to know that you've researched the profession. And when you look at this description that I have down here, I copied this from somebody else's application, and I really like this, and I'm going to send some of this out on slides to you guys later. I really like it because she's briefly mentioning here, this is what she actually did. During weekly 4-hour shifts, she answered the phones. But what she's focusing on more in this description is what she contributed as a hotline volunteer and what she learned from it, and kind of more why she did it. So she's talking about her passion for helping other people, for improving the future, and her takeaways were skill in handling stressful situations. So she developed those skills. Remember our AAMC competencies. You want to go to those AAMC competencies when you're talking about your experiences. So when you're talking about your research, yes, you may list some of the tasks. They don't necessarily care particularly about the tasks. What they care more about is the contributions and your takeaways, because what you're going to be doing as a physician is not the same as what you were doing when you were on your first research co-op, right? Or when you were doing your first research experience. They don't care that you're awesome at cleaning glassware. They want to know, what did you take away from this? What did you learn from it? What was a hypothesis that you were testing if you were doing research? Where was this research going? So they want to know more about big picture. So for example, for shadowing, yes, you followed a physician around. They know what shadowing is. What they want to know is, what did you take away from this experience? What did you learn from it? How is this something that you're going to carry forward in your role as a physician? How did you develop yourself according to the competencies that are that we have? Now, for MD programs, you have the opportunity to have 3 most meaningful experiences, and for those most meaningful experiences, you get an extra 1,325 characters. So you get to talk a little bit more about that experience, which is kind of important for you, because it really gives you an opportunity to delve more into what you did, what you learned from it, what your takeaways were. For the most meaningful experiences, you're going to choose 3 experiences, number 1, that were meaningful to you, but also think about what's going to be meaningful and what you want to talk about more to the admissions committee. So most people will choose something that's clinically related. Most people will choose something that's research related in here. And then their third one, there's a wide variety of different things, something service related, maybe you did something abroad, maybe you had a job that was particularly meaningful for you. So a wide variety of things. You all have three most important, most significant contributions. Um, so make sure that you add them because those extra characters are really valuable real estate to talk about your experiences. So let me just click finish here. So when you finish, you'll have up to 15 experiences here. So when you're looking at these different windows, there's different ways to use them. So let's say you did a clinical co-op and you had clinical research experience, plus you shadowed the physician while you were there. You can actually break that up into two separate boxes, into two separate experiences. So you'll talk about your clinical research, and then separately you'll talk about your shadowing. Even though they were all part of the same co-op, it gives you the opportunity to address things in different ways. So breaking out separate experiences that are significant for your application. You can also use those boxes to consolidate things. So let's say that you shadowed 5 different physicians for one day each. You may not want to use an entire box for each one of those shadow experiences because although they were probably meaningful for you, you don't want them to take up a third of your experiences. So you can take those 5 shadow days, put them in one box, list, who was the physician, what was their specialty, how many hours did you spend shadowing them. The same with awards. You can lump a whole bunch of awards in one section. So you are on the dean's list, you got a scholarship, so a bunch of those things that are Northeastern based, you can put all together in one box if it's something that, yes, you want them to know about this, but there's not really that much to add about it. Okay. Letters of evaluation. Now, if you are how do you deal with dates if you clump a bunch of things together? That's a good question. You can put a date range there. You can also, in those clumpings, just list the date next to each experience. So again, it's a little bit tricky because they want contact information for everything. And if you shadowed 5 physicians, you're not going to be able to put all of their contact information. So choose one of them. Do what makes sense to you. So you want to make sure, like if you're listing, okay, I spent 7 hours with this one physician, they're going to know that it was not during the entire range of dates. They're not trying to trip you up with this. They're just trying to get a sense of what the dates are. Um, if they have questions about your application, they'll usually ask you about it. They do, upon occasion, spot check applications, so they'll call the contact information and make sure that you actually were there during the time that you said so. And if they have concerns, they actually do randomly, they do audit applications. So you want to make sure you're not overstating anything, you're not putting on anything that you didn't do, because getting your application audited is not a pretty thing. So you really want to make sure that you're putting things in as in an ethical way, realizing, okay, some of this is a little bit tricky and I'm going to do the best that I can to logically put things in. And if you're putting a big clump of, like a big clump, try and break it down in the box, how you're talking about things. So for your letters, you're going to put a letter in for your committee letter. So you're going to add a letter. Whoever wrote your committee letter is going to be the author. So if you have a committee letter, just choose committee letter, Northeastern, and then you'll just put whoever did your committee letter interview. So either Dr. Begley, myself, or Ms. Wolfson, you'll put our contact information in here because we will each be writing the individual letter. So it'll look like this when it's finished. Now the assigned medical schools comes a little bit later, so we'll talk about that in a second. Now I added the second letter that's an individual letter. So you can see Dr. Letter Writer, I just called it. So most of you guys are just going to have a committee letter. And within that committee letter, all those letters that you sent to us through MAP will be included. You don't need to list all of those letter writers here. You just list committee letter. That committee letter contains the recommendation from whoever you interviewed with, plus the 4 to 6 letters that you had submitted through MAP. So those will not be listed separately here. This letter writer here is a separate letter that's going to be sent directly to the system. Most of you guys are not going to have any additional letters. Most of you will just have a committee letter sent. So the committee letter contains, 5 to 7 recommendations. That's typically enough. That's all they want to read. An individual letter, some people will add an individual letter if they have a letter writer who's affiliated with a school. So let's say you worked with somebody, you shadowed a physician who's on the admissions board at Harvard Medical School, you're applying there. You may have that person write a letter just for Harvard Medical School, and you would have them upload that letter separately, and you would add the letter here. So that letter would be added here. Later on, we're going to assign letters to the different schools, and you would just assign that one letter to the one school. So that's the one exception for when you might add a second letter. The committee letter for DO programs is the same as for the MD programs. We do one letter and it includes all of the other letters. And actually, some of the schools will specify in their secondaries that letters have to be signed, dated, and on letterhead, and all of ours are. We require that of the letter writers, just for your information. So next, you're going to choose your medical schools. So you go in here, you add a medical school. There's a bunch of different ways to select them. Let's say I'm looking at Connecticut, and then it'll list the schools. Let's say I'm interested in UConn. Have I applied to it before? So a lot of the letter writer schools will participate in AMCAS letter services. There are a few schools that do not participate in AMCAS letter services, and if you apply to one of those schools, you will have to let me know. So LSU does not participate in AMCAS letter services, for example. So you'll need to let me know, how do I send your letter in? So you'll need to give me that information for those particular schools. Otherwise, though, the letter is just going to automatically come. Have you applied to this school before? Probably not. And then if you're applying for a combined degree, you can put that information in here as well. Combined medical graduate. And then it'll tell you the different types. So if you're applying to, for example, an MPH program, you'll check that off here. Continue, and then here you're going to assign the letters. So you're going to assign the committee letter to all the schools. This individual letter I assigned to University of Miami. I'm only having it sent there, not the other schools. So this just gives you all of the information here. Once you're done, it will allow you to print. Oh, this is my personal statement. Sorry, that got a little ahead there. It will allow you to print a letter request. I guess actually that may be from here. For the pre-health office, so for myself, Dr. Begley, and Ms. Wolfson, you don't need to print a letter request. I am going to upload all the letters directly to a portal, so I don't need a letter request form. If you're sending a letter request to somebody else, so for Dr. Letter Writer, whoever that is, for that person, you would need to request send an AMCAS letter request so they know how to send it. For me, please don't send them because we don't need 100 extra emails with the letter requests. So you'll have your list of schools. It's going to keep adding on money as you apply. So it will tell you what your total is. Once you're done, you'll put that in that you're done. Now here's my personal statement. It's not really my personal statement. So in the essay section, that is your personal statement. Really important, it's a text box. Make sure to hit enter twice between paragraphs as opposed to enter once and tab. What happens is it doesn't recognize the tab form, and so it will just have one enter, and the personal statement then comes in as one big box, and that makes it a little bit more difficult for people to read. So having the two hitting enter twice is a way to break up those paragraphs, which makes it much more readable. And then finally, with this and with your working activities, proofread it, proof. You proofread it, have somebody who's good at editing, a friend proofread it, check and make sure if there are any errors. I recommend filling it out, then putting it aside for at least a week or so, coming back to it, and then when you look at it again, you may find an error that your eye just skimmed over the first time. Once you submit your application, you cannot change anything in the essay and the work activities section. You can't change any. You can add additional letters. You can change your contact information, but that is it. So if it goes in with a typo, it's going to stay with a typo. That said, upon occasion, am looking at people's applications and they have typos in them, and they still get accepted to medical school. So if you turn it in with a typo and you find it later, it doesn't mean you're not going to get accepted. If you have 20 typos, though, that's going to be a problem, because then they're going to be like, well, they obviously didn't care enough about this application to read it over. So do read it over really carefully. Standardized tests, your MCAT scores for AMCAS will get input from the system. For the DO programs for AACOMAS, you actually have to release your scores to AACOMAS, and there's a page to do that. So you'll have the opportunity to do that. Now with the AACOMAS application, the DO application, there are just a couple things that are a little bit different. One is that when you put in your letter of recommendation, it's going to automatically send a letter request. So if you are getting a committee letter, once you put that in, it's going to automatically come to us. If you're requesting a letter from somebody else, let's say somebody graduated from Unicom and you want them to send a separate letter, make sure you talk to them and that they know that the letter request is coming before you fill it out on the application, because otherwise they're going to get a letter request and they're going to be like, well, I never said I would write this letter, and that's not what you want. With the AACOMAS application, they give you the option of putting a deadline in there. So for the Northeastern deadlines, we ask that you put a date that's about a month in advance. If the deadline passes and the letter isn't in there, nothing happens to your application. But you just want to give people plenty of time. Last year, some people were putting it in and they were saying deadline 3 days from now. And we were like, well, that's not going to happen. The deadline is not really for Northeastern, for our advisors here. It's really more for those supplemental letters, just so they know this is when they should be trying to get it in by. We try very hard to get our letters in as fast as possible, but obviously there are a fair number of you and we can only write so many letters in a day, because we really do take the time to try and make sure we're showing who you are and really highlighting your accomplishments and achievements, and just our general sense of who you are as a person so that the schools can really get a good impression of that. And that takes a little bit of time. So we are very mindful, though, that, you know, the letters have to come in order for your application to be reviewed. So we will be spending a lot of time in end of May, June, and July writing letters, rest assured. The letters are a part of the secondary application, so your application can be verified. You can get secondaries and, you know, get those secondaries back without your letter being uploaded. So just so you're aware of that, your letter doesn't have to be uploaded before your application goes to the schools. It should be uploaded before the admissions committee start meeting. So that is a general overview of the application. Now, obviously, right now I can't submit it because the application hasn't opened, but once I can, you'll be able to push the submit application and obviously apply. Once you've submitted your application, we ask that you download a PDF copy of it. For the MD applications, you can download a copy with the date, time submitted. And for the other ones, you'll just download a copy of the application. For the DO applications, you'll download that from the schools section. So you'll just choose one school. You'll go into that one school and you'll download the application from that school. And that's what you'll send to us. So you're not download it, save it to your hard drive, upload it to MAP, and then you're going to email whoever wrote your letter, and you're going to tell them, I've applied. Please put me in the queue to write my committee letter. We write all the letters after you have applied, and we don't write letters for you until you have your MCAT score. So if you're applying now and you're getting your MCAT score in a few weeks, we're going to wait and make sure that you're actually applying before we write that letter. So just so you're aware of that as the next step. So any questions, any additional questions about this? While I'm giving you guys a chance to type, just a couple extra little pointers. The secondaries will come via email, usually a week or two after the schools get your application, although each school has their own process. Some of those get filtered to junk mail. So you really, once you submit, you really, really, really want to be checking your junk mail and make sure that, you know, you're getting any secondaries that are in there. I've also heard of interview requests getting filtered to junk mail. So you really just want to be making a practice of every day going in and looking at your junk mail and making sure that there's nothing in there that is really important about your medical school application that you may have missed. So just get in that habit and keep doing that for the next year once you submit. All right, so it looks like there are no further questions. If you do have an individual question that's something that is about your application specifically, definitely feel free to send me an email, set up an appointment to come in, and I look forward to seeing everybody's applications soon. And you know, to hearing about how you do with the application process. So keep in touch and keep us posted about questions and, you know, the fact that you've applied. All right, thank you for attending, everyone. And